Good afternoon and welcome to this second edition of our program fair here in the UK, Open Conversation. So the theme of our discussion this afternoon is corruption in Cameroon. Is a change of mentality and practice possible? So I welcome all of you from all over the UK and beyond the UK, within Europe and even in Cameroon, to this wonderful event which present the current situation in Cameroon, but with a twist from the diaspora in terms of solutions to some of those problems. So, just to give a bit of background, Cameroon is the largest and most diversified economy in the Six Nations Central African Monetary and Economic Zone (CEMAC). Cameroon hosts favorable conditions for agriculture, has conditions for agriculture, huge mineral deposits, and significant natural gas and crude oil reserves. UK businesses are significant players in prospection of gas and energy, as well as oil in Cameroon, as well as financial and professional services. In 2020, for instance, the Cameroon government launched a 10-year national development strategy, deepening its ambition to modernize the economy and increase local transformation of raw materials in a wider drive to become an emerging market economy by 2035. But subsidies for oil, electricity, and food imports significantly strain public finance. For some major debt funded infrastructure projects, including the Kribi Deep Sea Port, for instance, dams and sports stadium, which started years ago, these are all yet to be completed, adding further strain to the public finances. The economy has been hard hit by COVID-19, just like many other economies across Europe and Africa. And Boko Haram and the Noso wars have also made more misery to our financial situation. The current priorities for the government are to reduce the country's dependence on imports, promoting value added creation, and set conditions for development of a dynamic private sector. So, beyond all of the above challenges, many Cameroonians, including the government itself, agree that today corruption is the venom that is eating and killing the infrastructure and implementation or execution of state activities. So government ministers and heads of parapublic and public, as well as giant private enterprises, are increasingly being brought down as Cameroon's anti-corruption organ intensifies its effort. The Cameroonian government would say that the fight against corruption is succeeding because Cameroon no longer appears among the first five most corrupt nations in the world. So to discuss this afternoon, I have here with me members of the Cameroon diaspora here in the UK. Jean-Michel Goana is an engineer and an entrepreneur residing in Reading, UK. And Philbert Tene is a secondary school teacher residing in Leicester. So I welcome both here this afternoon on this second edition of our program, Open Conversations. So just to say what I've said in my introduction, I have, in a way, elucidated the current state of the situation in Cameroon. So I'm just going to bring here Jean-Michel Goanos to start with. So, Jean-Michel, good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon, Eve. Well, thank you.
Fantastic. Can you just quickly, again, I've introduced you, but do you want to say a couple of things about yourself initially, please?
Hi, good evening, Eve. Good evening to our listeners. My name is Jean-Michel Goana. As you well said, Eve, I'm engineer. I'm a pluridisciplinary engineer, and I'm also entrepreneur. I live in the UK, in England, in the UK, and it is my pleasure to be here tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So my second guest here this afternoon is Philbert Tene. Philbert, welcome.
Thank you, Eve. Thanks a lot. Thanks to our viewers and thanks to Jean-Michel as well. So really, as you've said, I'm Philbert Tene. I live in Leicester in the UK. I'm a secondary school teacher. I've got several interests, but just for now, let's stick with that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you and welcome. Just use the opportunity to say welcome to all those who are viewing us as the program is live now. So I welcome everyone, especially comrades across the UK and beyond the UK who are currently watching this program. So all welcome. Thank you very much for taking part to this event this afternoon. So you have certainly listened to my introduction, where I've kind of set the current situation in terms of the reality with the fight against corruption in Cameroon. So I've to some extent elucidated the current state of the situation. Now, having listened to what I've said, I'm just going to ask first, starting with Jean Michel, is that your own assessment of the situation currently in Cameroon?
Thank you, Eve, for sharing the microphone again. I would say thank you for all the work that you've done. I think it looks like from the reading, what I hear, it's a good dive into the situations that we're having. Really happy to know that you've mentioned the key recent challenges that the country's been facing. So I will agree in a way that exactly it is a good reflection in terms of overall analysis of the situation.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So I'm just going to turn to Philbert now. So Philbert, as I mentioned before, so certainly, the Cameroon government has come to a position where it believes itself that it's becoming almost impossible, to realize some of the major infrastructure work which is required to get Cameroon onto that road to actually see it as an emerging economy by 2035, pardon me. So with the current state of affairs, especially with what we're seeing in terms of the fight against corruption, what would be your own perspective as to where we are now and what can we do to improve things?
Thank you very much. I mean, as you've said, the situation is pretty much, no one will argue against the situation. Is exactly what you've said. And is saying, before I came to sit down, I had a quick look at Transparency International website, for example, and they said in 2022, Cameroon was classed 142 among 180 countries in terms of corruption. So that probably on its own tells the whole story. Now, again, we're not going to just stick on those figures, but we'll look at what is really happening. You name a number of challenging infrastructure that are proving to be really, how should I put it, maybe not realistic for Cameroon until corruption is resolved, but that's the reality. So it's a real. I think that's one of the major challenges that they have to solve, or Cameroon has to solve, if we were to actually see developments be on the road of proper development. So we really need to solve corruption, because until that is done, we will struggle. So it's not impossible. I think it can be solved if the political will is really there. It can be solved. So at the moment, just looking at the situation, is really bad, but it's not one to despair of, because if the will is there, I'm sure Cameroonian will take over. It's just that I don't see real will at the moment. I don't see a real, how should I put the real arms to fight corruption. If we take it as something needing a battle, we don't see them in place right now. But with the right leader, with the right tools, corruption could be easily won, because you look at some countries such as Rwanda. I've heard that you cannot say zero corruption, but at least the structure are in place such that people know that if they're caught into that, they'll be in serious trouble. So really, yeah, maybe I'm going a bit fast, but the situation is not the greatest. The situation is probably as bad as it can be, but we should still have hope. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here thinking about the future. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So from what I've heard, obviously, the current situation is not one of very positive. It's something we could take away. I could take away from what you've said. Obviously, you've mentioned something which is absolutely important. What you've actually said is that for anything to happen, we certainly need to see a real political will. Now, I'm just going to keep just keep you going on that a little bit. So, in preparation for this debate, I run a small survey just to gather the views within the diaspora and more specifically here in the UK. So one of the questions I asked was, so how effective do you think are the current measures and by the government and the institutions that have been put in place to fight corruption in Cameroon? So you would know there are, efforts, be it through institutions that have been put in place, but also some of the measures that the government within itself takes in ensuring that, there is some form of accountability in how we manage our affairs. And so from that question, it was unequivocal. Most people who actually responded to the survey said clearly it's totally ineffective. So whatever has been put in place now to fight, it's totally ineffective. And aside just going back to what you've said, there needs to be a serious will from the government. Can you just expand a little bit on that? So what do you mean by serious will?
Okay, thank you, Eve. Thanks for. Okay, I mean, I'm just gonna take one example. If we have a proper independent justice system that can go against people who are alleged to be corrupt or facilitating corruption, and they have all the power to prosecute and apply the law as when it's needed, I'm sure it'll be different. But right now, the feeling is not that it's working, because it's like you have how should I put? You have interference from various people, various powers. So really, I mean, if it was working, people would just be even afraid of getting involved into corruption. We've got example of corrupt cases that have been how should I put, raised by government institution, but nothing has been done since. So if you take into account if you just look at the COVID-19, the COVID and the amount of money that was said to have been involved in embezzlement, nothing has been done as to now. So we still waiting into hearing into what has happened. There were various cases. So people need to see action happening. So if people are not seeing action being taken, it's probably the reason why they're not scared of getting involved into corruption. So proper action will lead into people stopping, for example. And that's what I mean by real political will. The real political will, the government set the agenda, and then when people see that that agenda is being followed, that will be a big shock to everyone thinking of, oh yes, I can get involved in that myself, or any organization, because it's not just individual, it could be organization, it could be politician and all those. But there has to be a real, the perception count for a lot, really. It's not just saying we've got this, but how are people seeing how things are going? People are not seeing any change. Therefore, that's why in line with the survey, you realize people don't think that things are working. None of what has been done is working at the moment. Otherwise, corruption will not be increasing, but at least people will have there'll be that perception that no, things are getting better.
Absolutely, thank you. And that's really telling, because I've just again had another glance at the result of the survey, and actually, as I say, not just that the current measures or effort by the government to fight corruption are totally ineffective, but most importantly, what most people are referred to is the lack of proper separation of powers between the executive, the legislative, and certainly the judiciary. So, and I know you've mentioned about having an independent judiciary system would probably favor, and that would probably be the main thing you would really want to say in terms of ensuring there's a real political will. Now, I'll turn to Jean-Michel just to say, well, obviously, just thinking of that separation of power and just holding on to the fact that we need to have proper independent judicial system in place. What would be your take? Would you be on that same view, or do you have a slightly different view on that?
Right. I think we need to go back into really to the nitty-gritty, to the basics. I confess that I've spent most of my adult life in outside the country. So my exposure to to corruption will be maybe not exactly the one the feeling or the reality, the local reality, which brings me to say, first we need to define what corruption is. Maybe see the different faces of the prism, and then from there we can make a deeper analysis. It's important to note that corruption has got a perception, and there is a true corruption and there is a perception of corruption. Because people may say something which basically it's like which is like a local practice, something that has been accepted by people and look like corruption somewhere else. I'll be talking, for example, in the countries where some of us are. In the case of the UK, for example, you cannot be seen to be being a patron of a third party above a certain amount of money. So that would be seen as corrupting, for example, an official. In other places, buying a beer to someone or buying a bottle of champagne, for that matter, to someone will not be seen as corruption. So it gets into practices. But I really want us to maybe to cover that point first so that we can clarify and understand that, as Fulbert just said at the beginning, obviously Cameroon is deep down there in terms of a corruption chart. But how is it made, and what are the criteria that are put together to put those charts all together? And it's important to note that we're talking about corruption in rural areas that are not the same in city areas. We're talking about corruption in the public sector and corruption in the private sector. It's quite difficult to put them all in the same basket. But what is corruption in the first place? It's important to mention that corruption takes a few parties to happen. And in the case of Cameroon, it's no different. It's just that it is really almost everywhere, I would say. To say it is endemic, it will be an understatement. From personal experience, as well as from opinions, you did a survey, and obviously, yes, I agree with what the survey comes up with. But it's important to understand that for corruption to happen, we need to have a person in authority or a person in trust who acts in a way that is dishonest, really dishonest, or which is criminal, and all that for their own profit. And more people do that, the more it becomes a habit, a kind of culture, and people are expected to do something. You'll be frowned upon if you don't bring someone's beer or if you don't bring someone's fuel for their car. I was just speaking to with someone in Cameroon recently, and they were talking about the story. They wrote to a minister, and the minister duly did their diligence. They did their job properly, and it was just a matter of them turning up to collect the letter from the minister. They had paid all the stamps that were required, but the person who called them to come and collect the letter told them, j'attends mon carburant. In other words, when you come to collect your letter, bring the fuel for my car. Now, someone can hear that and laugh, but it is a symbol of the fact that people are abusing their position of authority, position of trust, to gain some advantages. That's what we're talking about. Now, this is something silly as a policeman asking for something in the file before they let you cross a gate or go through because you haven't got the relevant papers. And sometimes because you got everything, they just want to waste your time. I'm not certain about the reality right now on the field, but it used to be the case. People will put a little note in the papers in order to get the processing to go quicker. But at the end of the day, once we've clarified what is really, where does Transparency International come with their numbers? How does it apply? Does it apply to the public sector? Does it apply to the private sector? Because the private sector and public sector, they work together, but they're quite different. And the dishonesty or the corruption has got a slightly different coloring from one side or the other. But really, it's important to understand there are many parties. The person in authority abusing their powers for personal gain, but it's also in the bureaucracy of the country. It's also with politicians. This is why politics is going to be seen in slightly different way. It's also with people who have got a criminal mind. They just want to gain. Whatever happens, they got to gain. There is no, and this is where the judiciary come into it. I agree as well with the analysis, initial analysis. But it's very important to understand that we cannot ignore something that is really that can turn nasty in Cameroon. We're talking about, there's not a more technical word for it, I forgot it, but we're talking about tribalism. People trying to put their own people from their own tribes in positions in order to let them give more favor. It's actually it's a bias. So people should be put in positions from expertise and expertise and the help they can bring in. But it's also important to understand that when they are in those positions, they should act in a way that is not biased. This is also how corruption comes in. I come in, I speak your local language, you grant me more favors, or you process my file a little bit quicker. Or maybe I'm from a specific tribe, and when I'm negotiating a contract, whether it's a local contract or international contract, I tend to grant more favor to people from my own color. So I know it's difficult to grasp all those parameters at the same time, but it's important to understand that corruption can be endemic. It is endemic right now in Cameroon, based also on my own experience, but it can also be biased in a non-conscious way. People will have practices because that's what we do. That's just what we do. And finally, on the case, I would say corruption is a practice that's observed everywhere in the world. It just happened to be endemic in some other places. And in developing countries, yes, it is something that is there. There are probably towards the end of the chat, we will have the opportunity maybe to propose a few things. But really right now, yes, agreed, the judiciary's got to go down there and do some proper changes. The change is also to be applied at a structural level so that we know that if someone deserves a service, they have the service. So I'll probably stop there.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jean-Michel. And just to sort of recap what you've said. So you've mentioned a number of things. One is just to consider an element of perception when we talk about corruption. So we really need to ensure that we understand each other, what we mean by. And for what I gather, obviously, if one is to use a position of trust and power to influence outcome of any event, that's a form of corruption. And I think, generally speaking, that's how we view it. Not least here, but even back home, it should be the same thing. I know you've also mentioned about some of our local reality, some cultural realities, which we also need to, and what you mentioned, just take an example of somebody who just go and ask for a service and feel that, to get that service, they need some form of favors and what you call bringing some sort of fuel money or any such thing, how we call it back home. Yes, fully understand that. Another thing which you mentioned was governance, proper governance in place in how things should be done, and people have some form of conflict of interest in how things are done. If there are clear processes in ensuring that those conflict of interest are properly managed, then we will not find ourselves where some of those very soft and subtle forms of corruption do happen and do go completely unnoticed. And it's partly because we don't have the proper governance in place to ensure that those things could actually be rooted out. But I'm just going to go a little bit further and just to buttress the point of what I've said at the beginning. And just in recent memory, I'm just going to share a bit here for what I've also kind of looked and assessed in terms of what has been witnessed over the past few years. Number of financial scandals. 2019 African Cup of Nations project, and we all know exactly that was one of the largest projects, which was rocked by financial scandal, leading to the country being stripped of its hosting right in favor of Egypt due to massive delays in the preparations and delivery of all those infrastructure projects. Whistleblowers actually claim that an estimated 1.8 billion euros of Cameroonian public money was swallowed in contract, shrouded in controversy. So a video of Cameroon official allegedly defending why a bag of salmon cost 15,000 CFA franc for the AFCON, again, African Cup of Nations project, instead of the normal £4,500. Those are just typical examples I'm trying to share here. That went viral on social media. One of the university lecturer and civil society activists in Cameroon, John Ako, said that the prices of 2019 AFCON infrastructure were 10 times more than is usual for the same kind of infrastructure in other country nations. 10 times more. Just hold on to that. Findings indicated that public contracts suffer one of the highest hits. He went on to say that within Cameroon, those who implemented decisions or grant the order of contract always have a percentage reserve in their name. That is just to buttress on that very point, that there are some really deep-rooted governance issues that do not exist. And if those governance as the realities were to be put in place, we're probably going to be able to get rid of some of these issues. Yet, nothing has been done to date. I move on. COVID Gate and the damning report by the Chamber of Accounts in December 2019, that is yet to be concluded. And yet, we have the facts. We have a report which was undertaken by one of the highest chambers within our justice system in Cameroon, and yet nothing is done. Not too far ago, the Anglo-Swiss mining company Glencore PLC admitted having bribed SNH and Sonara with over 7 billion CFA franc. All of these revelations led to Cameroonian lawyer Akere Mona, who was former president of the Cameroon Bar Association and former vice president of Transparency International, to refer the matter to the national president of Anti-Corruption Commission, CONAC. He wrote a letter on May 27 to denounce the admission of corrupt practices by Glencore and the consequences for the SNH and Sonara to take urgent action. Information was published in the Financial Times here in London, revealing that Glencore pleaded guilty to charges of bribery and corruption. Akere Mona then concluded in his letter, calling this anti-commission to open an investigation into this sordid affair that involved two Cameroonian most important public enterprises. Other countless instances of land misappropriations involving minister and senior government officials. We've noted a few recently in Douala. So in the end, are there really any viable solutions to corruption in Cameroon under the current system? That is the question I'm asking. And just going to ask you, Jean-Michel, starting with you, are there really any viable option, any viable solutions that you may think of? I know you started talking about it, but can you now, elaborate a little bit more in terms of any viable options you may think of?
Yes, thank you. I think corruption, as we mentioned earlier, is not just a Cameroon thing. I was born there. It's always a pleasure to stop there. My place of residence in the United Kingdom. I'm very happy to be here. I contribute to the community, but at the same time, I see myself as having the duty to also contribute in Cameroon and make sure that things get better in the community I was born in. If it wasn't for that community, I wouldn't be in the United Kingdom right now. It's important to understand that whatever the situation, we need to find a solution. Right now in the UK is almost zero if you're looking at in terms of index, in terms of corruption, because they've applied systematically a set of solutions that allows the country to go slowly into the right direction. And the question will be, what is the right direction? So the right direction is a system where internally as well as externally, the main actors are seen to be honest into transactions, where the main actors are seen to be acting in a way that is not criminal. That's very important, whether it's in the city or whether it's in the countryside. Of course, there's always going to be a little bit of favor that is done here and there that doesn't break per se the law, but it's a matter of thinking. It starts in front of the mirror. That's where it starts. That's where it starts, in front of the mirror. Ask yourself, do I need to give a coin to someone to request for a service? Now, let me put it this way. In some countries, a tip is demanded literally. If you don't give a tip, you could be in trouble. Now, what do you call that? I personally believe, of course, little tiny corruption,
Mm-hmm.
But let's say a tip should be a tip. It comes from the heart. So it's from the person in front of the mirror. That's where we start. Because for corruption to happen, you need to have a few parties. And sometimes two, sometimes three parties. The person who is abusing the power and the person who is being submissive in an unduly way or in a necessary way, we're not in the army, to the power of the other person. So really, don't give the bribe. Kind of make sure you don't give the bribe. Or make sure you don't ask for a bribe. So this is why I'm saying it starts in front of the mirror. That's very important. And the judiciary has got to be where the person in front of the mirror cannot take personal action. The judiciary has got to kick in. Why should I spend 3 hours as a police at the police check when I'm not even supposed to be there? Give me a ticket. I'll go to the police station and answer my case. Why do you want to waste my time? I should have a hotline, literally. Maybe that's a solution I'm bringing forward. I should have a hotline where I show proofs that I have been stuck. I should record it on the phone and send it to an authority that is able to hit on the table quite hard. This is on a microscopic level. I'm going really personal to micro to macro. Now, if we're going macro, we're talking about the Cameroon government dealing businesses with the UK government. Why should corruption be intervened there? Because if the person in front of the mirror came out of this house in the morning and saying, good God, I'm going there to help this country buy a lot of energy, and in a fair way, they will win, we will win too. There's no reason why it should end up in front of courts. No reason. The same way, if an official from X country, Cameroon maybe in this case, wakes up in the morning, goes to negotiate a contract with the country, where it clearly states that they will have their own bonus of not 1%, and it's official, everybody can check it. Why will I think corruption? I'll be I will be doing my job and doing it correctly. So what I'm saying is, where it is not defined what advantages are given to the person negotiating a contract at macro level, we should have a clear way of checking exactly what was said and what was signed as well on both sides. I understand there could be some contracts that are bound to secrecy, but it doesn't forbid the fact that there should be a commission. There should be commissions where there is high value contract or transactions, whether it's state transaction or private transactions. There should be entities that literally go there and check exactly why. It becomes smart. Corruption can be put in such a smart way that you only realize it 5-10 years later. Why should we privatize in some countries, maybe in Cameroon as well, sectors that are of national importance, like health? Why should we privatize, for example, the CNPS? That's the national health of the country, not national health. Social services of the country. It should stay in the hands of the state and be properly monitored. So these are sort of things that we'll mention. But it's very important to say that it's not in front of the mirror. It has to be acted with at the micro level, oneself first, then in the community where people act in the right way, and also at national and international level, whether it's the public sector or the private sector. And the law should be applied properly, and it should not be tolerated.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to take you on a couple of points. So one thing you've mentioned is you repeated it time and time again. People need to look themselves in the mirror. But I think, and you also mentioned obviously that where do we see corruption? Is it just at the highest level, or do we see corruption across the land and at those macro levels? And one of the challenges in Cameroon is when the people are left in abject poverty, without any way for so many to have access to employment or other means, then clearly it forces people to look at desperate solutions. So clearly that's one thing one should think about. So do those who are then forced to find any way possible, any means possible to have access to employment or any other services? Could we put them on the same scale as those who willingly go out and embezzle huge amount of public money for self-interest? Could they be put on exactly on the same platform?
Well, I'll be straight to the point here. Corruption is corruption, wherever it comes up. Cameroon or many other countries around the world are sitting on extraordinary wealth. This has been sold literally, it's been given for free to so many other parties, whether it's government or private investors, so-called investors. But the population just needs to survive. They just need to survive. So if really at all levels corruption was looked into, I understand that the poor person who is desperate down there is going to do something that is illegal, dishonest, criminal in order to survive. Yes, this is where the political will comes into play. If those, for example, I'm just giving a few simple examples. If those oil fields, those mine fields, those mineral fields that are being discovered over and over all across Africa and on other continents, if they were managed properly, then it will cascade eventually down to the poorest of the poorest, who would then look at themselves in the mirror and be happy. In some countries, when you are not working, you get the support from the government. And it is fair and normal. But in Cameroon, for example, I've got poor cousins that I have to support. I've got tens of people that look up to me, and I've got to work hard like there's no tomorrow and think about them. It makes me cry sometimes because I can't help them. I don't know what they're doing. Sometimes I close my eyes, my ears and my eyes because I'm just scared of what they could be doing because they're desperate. But it makes me cry doubly when I know that the riches of the country are being either dilapidated or given out in terms of contracts at the really insulting prices. And this cost to everybody. Maybe the guy signing the big contract and having his own back kick is having some money coming in, but it's killing many other citizens. So when it gets to feeding the poor who is desperate, it goes now into the regime doing what they need to do to make sure that the riches of the country are properly spread to anybody that needs it.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So, yeah, just to add to what you've said, the National Anti-Corruption Commission (CONAC) most recent report in 2021 that was the country saw 375 billion CFA francs returned to its coffer. So somehow they are managing to claim some of that money back. But despite this effort, civil society actors think that CONAC and anti-corruption agencies and poor governance remain, as you mentioned before, governance remain key factors in holding back Cameroon's development. So CONAC and many other agencies have been created by the state to simply come to confirm that Cameroon will solve problems with this commission. But then, more often than not, most of the commissions created are still a problem and center for corruption within Cameroon. So all of those themselves feel that though they're making an effort to try and recoup and claim back some of this money, it's still a real challenge. So again, and going back to you, Philbert, in terms of some of the viable solutions that you may think of in terms of actually really effectively having something, and I'm sure I've mentioned before, institutions, obviously. In the UK, for instance, there are a number of acts, legislative act, and one which I know of is the Public Interest Act, which puts a duty on each citizen to be able, whenever you've seen anything going on in any company you work in, which you believe to be an act of fraud or corruption, then obviously you can and you have a duty to denounce that. And so, what is your take then when it comes to thinking of viable solutions to corruption in Cameroon?
Thank you very much. Thanks. So, I mean, some of the things I was thinking of have already been raised, really. So, I stick with political will. So political will is the starting point. So if the government in place is serious about corruption, I'm sure it can be solved. It's not going to be solved overnight, sure, but it will be, and people could actually be seeing over time that things are changing. Because if the direction of change is the right one, everyone will be happy. Jean-Michel point out the fact that the level of poverty, that's one of the things I'm thinking of. So if the political will is there, the government of the day will make sure that a number of things are put into place to avoid corruption, to avoid any excuses. So for example, level of poverty. People are living in a certain level of poverty where like they would try extreme solution, or they would think of things that are probably not lawful just to survive. It's not okay, but of course, you will understand probably why they're doing it. But I've heard somebody saying recently that, okay, if that was only the case, maybe, but what about top officials who already have a lot of million still getting involved into fraud or corruption? The Glencore case recently raised, it wasn't about people on the SMIC, or it wasn't about people on SMIC. So that's not the problem. But if the political will is there, again, I keep saying political will, they'll put in place everything, including training, so that people know, like you mentioned the act. So there are plenty of job here that you cannot go through unless you've done training on fraud, corruption, and all the rest. So we need all of that. But again, the society on its own, if you think about the society, the UK culture or society in which we live, the culture is such that you cannot even think of proposing to give something to a police officer. It's no way. I've never heard of something like that happening. But I'm sure it has. The culture has been worked over time. So public, the political will, including the looking at salary, looking at work should pay, really, making sure that work pay a decent wage to those who are working, making sure that there are training all over the place. So all those things, I'm sure, all together, we're not going to disagree. But the one thing that I think is essential is accountability. People should be accountable for what they do. And back to where I started, the judicial system should be able to act without waiting for any order or any prompt from anyone. They should be able to act in a way that serves as example, really. And when people be convinced that no matter who you are, no matter what you are, no matter what job you do, no matter who you know, you'll be in serious difficulty if you get involved with those, with corruption, for example, which is the topic we're discussing today. I'm sure there'll be a change. The fear of the policeman is the beginning of knowledge, something like that you said. Of course it is. It is. I cannot take my car out there. I know that there are speed camera and I go past them because I'm going to call somebody later. It doesn't work like that. If I'm flashed by a speed camera, I'll have to pay the fine or to face prosecution. And that's simple as that. Whereas if I knew that I could call somebody or I can pay somebody, probably, maybe I wouldn't mind as much as I do now. And that's just like a basic example. Accountability should be the first. We don't care whether you believe it's right or not, but just knowing that if you're involved in corruption, there will be serious consequences. I think that's the first step we need to look at. And at the moment, I don't think there's that accountability. There isn't. The Glencore case, for example, as far as I know, no one has been even in difficulty because of that. The COVID-19, the football infrastructure or the sporting infrastructure, nothing has been set up to now. So again, it means that people will feel that they can do whatever they want because others have done it in the past and there have been no consequences.
Okay.
I've introduced myself as a secondary school teacher. When you get into a classroom, you have students not doing the work. If you're going to walk past them without actually challenging them, you will soon realize that more than half of your class will sit there doing no work. Later on, it will be the three-quarter of your class, and probably later everyone. But when you act on the first one seriously, you can see a difference. And that's why if you look in the context of the UK, for example, students will sometimes be happy to have a supply teacher because they know that, oh, he's here just for today. He's not going to follow anything. But when they know that a system is in place that will be followed up, it does reduce quite a lot the problem that you will have. So for me, accountability on top of the political will. But again, all of those could be put under political will. The political will will put in place all the procedure and the accountability, and then hopefully, I mean, not hopefully, I'm 100% sure it will work. It will work probably over time, but it will work, no doubt about that. The society where we live, I don't think it became what it is overnight. I'm sure they work over it and they're where they are now just because the change of culture or setting the culture in place so that people know that, okay, this is what is accepted, this is not accepted.
Wonderful. Yeah, you've touched on a couple of things, and sorry, before I come back to you, Jean-Michel, you've touched on a couple of things, absolutely wonderful. So you've talked about accountability a number of times, and that's really, really important. And the point I was just trying to get to, yes, accountability, and where does accountability start? And again, you've mentioned about having the proper system in place. Now, who sets those systems in place? Are they set at the grassroots level, and you set those systems right from the top? And I think it links quite nicely with what you mentioned, accountability a number of times. If that being the case, and we just touch back on these, some of these very huge financial scandals, you mentioned the Glencore one. The main responsibility here is the government's one. If you mention the AFCON one, the main responsibility rests with the government. And then if you even go on the COVID gate one, the main responsibility is the government. So if I'm an operator or maybe a citizen, and I could see this happening right at the very hand of the country, with government officials being responsible for this behavior, which it's absolutely nothing is being done about it, and this is what I call at some point the rule of impunity. Does that go back then to say at the end, who holds prime responsibility for the situation?
Oh, is that directly to me?
That's the question, yeah, directly to you,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, we can say the government and everything, yes, the government, but those ruling the country at the moment, there's no doubt about that. We need to have trust. And that's why I mentioned a leader. You need a leader with a vision who will sell that vision to the rest of the country. And once the rest of the people will buy the vision, of course, things are going to work. It's a matter of, okay, this is where we want to be, and how this is how we're going to get there. So if nothing is done, like no accountability, people doing what they want to do, where is the trust then? There's no trust. And right at the moment, lack of trust, lack of accountability, lack of role models, lack of everything you can say. That is probably where we are. So the system is broken. The system is broken completely. And what is the system broken? The system is broken completely.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, take it back up to what the question I was going to ask at some point. So you read it quite nasty. It seems like the system is broken. And just to go back to Jean-Michel now, and I know you were going to say something before, but you're more than welcome to start that point before touching on what I'm going to say. So clearly, as what you mentioned, it seems there is the system somewhere does not work as it should. So, just using your term there, the system seems to be broken. Other nations have been able to get the system to work. You will have kind of example, which I'm sure you may want to bring here. And I'm just going to turn to Jean-Michel now just to ask, in your own personal experience and from what you've seen across the world and the time you live here in the UK, what is your take on how corruption is actually dealt with here, or what is in place to ensure that it doesn't happen?
Well, I'll start by saying it would be pretentious to say that Cameroon is not working on that. They are surely working on the ways to reduce corruption. But, if you take the thief and put him in charge of the committee of corruption control, then we are in trouble. I'm not saying that those in the helm of that are part of that. But if I reverse the road and starting at the macro level, maybe at the state and the government level, really it's important to understand that it's got to be a state policy that there is transparency and accountability. I know the word accountability isn't going to come, but it is a word that needs to infuse and diffuse within everybody's souls and spirits, everybody working for the government, working for the public sector or the private sector. We can't reinvent the wheel. Let's just put it that way. We cannot reinvent the wheel. We need to copy good practices somewhere else. This is why there are departments where we check quality and good practices. This is very important accountabilities. You get taught good practices. You get taught behavior and attitudes when you're dealing with other parties, or whether you're dealing internally or externally. It's very important. It needs to be within the checks. Since there is a lack in terms of applying quality. If you say standards, ISO standards, call it French standard or American standards, you need to go through it. You need to make sure that things are properly documented. That accountability goes through that as well, because you just can't do things and move on. No, you got to be able to say, I left it here, and someone else can take it from where I left it. And it's got to follow a set of documented practices. Very important. I worked at international level for many years, and I cannot get away with certain things. It has to be documented properly. I called this person this day, and it is documented. We had a meeting at this particular time, and this is the summary of what was spoken about. We proposed this amount of money for the first part of the contract, and there is no plus 1,000 minus 1,000. No, it has to be clear and limpid. Accountability, business practices. Now, I understand that there are complexities with cultures and traditions, things that sometimes we do, in which case it has to be written clearly. We had to organize a lavish meeting for this village because it is custom to do that, to do business. Let's write it down. It has to be clear in such a way that we know that's exactly what it is. Okay, not a bag of cement that costs 15,000 in terms of local currency when it's supposed to be 3,000 or 4,000. It has to be clearly labeled. Okay, in that case, if it wasn't labeled, we wouldn't have seen it. This is why there's not going to be commissions of accountability and business practices that clearly says it. Now, again, if I go from the top down to the bottom, well, it's important to understand that people in position and in charge, we're talking about the government here, they need to be accountable. I've done something. These are the traces of what I've done. It's documented here. This is what we spend. I earn my salary, so I shouldn't need that. It brings another case that we had earlier. If I earn my salary, it should be a salary that allows me to live decently and according to the job I'm doing, not to be exposed to temptation. Mm-hmm. So going up, down again, when it comes to society, again, we all belong to a group, maybe a group of elites, maybe a group of interest, or maybe a group of people from a particular town. Mm-hmm. We need to be accountable. When we're taking an act, it has to be seen as a win-win situation in such a way that when it is being analyzed, business practice again, we know and see that yes, it was done in a fair way, not just to advantage us, but it's done in a fair way, whether it's in the public sector or in the private sector, without wanting to babysit the private sector because we want them to boom at the same time, but it has to be done in a way that is fair. If the private sector wants to negotiate a contract, it has to be open. Okay, it can be closed, but it's got to be committees that are able to check it. And very importantly, because they bear the most of the power, there needs to be a name and shame kind of policy, where people who are in power and entrusted by either the government or the people are really shamed clearly. I'm proposing now, for example, there's got to be commissions that follow tracks until the grave or after the grave of someone who's stolen or embezzled. We need to recoup the whole money plus interest of what was stolen and until it comes back. It's just not enough to send someone to prison. They sit there in prison and they're enjoying the billions, literally, and it's not a joke, the billions that they've embezzled. Doesn't make sense. Because crime pays. If crime pays, what do we do? Come on. If crime pays, people will keep on perpetuating. It becomes a culture. And sometimes in the country, it was almost stealing 500 millions in terms of local currency was nothing. Billions was a little bit more interesting. So it's very important. Name and shame, and have commissions that will track and follow until the last penny, last CFA in that case, or maybe any other fancy currency is recouped. It's important. That will teach others not to go in that particular line. So follow cheats. Make sure we go there. Political will, accountability, business processes. And the amount of time, in the interest of time, we'll probably stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, and that's really, really, again, for examples here in the UK abound. And I'm sure you mentioned you started with having policies in place, and I'll take the example of the NHS, whereby across the NHS we've got what we call whistleblowing policies. Other organizations call it raising concerns. So all trust in the UK, for those who are probably not familiar with that system here, the NHS is the National Health Service in the UK. So we have policies in place across organizations within the National Health Service, whereby managers and those responsible for teams and services have those policies to turn to in terms of ensuring that there are mechanisms to raise issues of concerns, especially when there is mismanagement of funds. So that's absolutely critical. There is, in addition to that, other policies like gratuities you mentioned about, providing small funds for services to be offered. Even senior managers, like doctors, you will attend a doctor, and if you had a good treatment, you may think, I may probably buy a small present for my doctors. Now that's governed by policies, and there are policies for those type of things which we call gratuity. So there are policies in place to ensure, and I'm sure across your professional bodies, and again I turn to you, Philbert, and that's probably be part of your concluding remarks. So within your own professional body and for what you know within the school environment, what are the processes that you normally are guided by when it comes to ensuring that we fight fraud and corruption?
Thank you, Eve. I mean, everything you've said, we've got pretty much the same system. So we've got what we call the declaration of interest. So regularly you have to fill and sign one, so that we know exactly what you are involved with apart from your work, so that if you did anything in relation to your work which was linked to your interest, either close or far, that will be follow up. So yes, there is pretty much is the same system everywhere. We do the anti-bribery, anti-fraud, anti-corruption training regularly. So I'm pretty much sure they are the same process, really.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think we're coming to the end of our session this afternoon. I'm just going to, if you allow me, conclude, unless any of you want to have a last concluding remark, just to say, it is just one of those very key things we will have to think about when we start thinking about how we're going to build, or some will say rebuild, our country. And it's absolutely important that we start conversations, thoughts around this very important topic of corruption, because as I said right at the beginning and in my introduction remarks, that this is probably one of the venom that any effort to try and get our country back on that proper development Chad is really not succeeding because so far any effort's been thwarted by scandals. And so we really need to start thinking, if we were to be in charge of the country tomorrow, or even if we know, what can we propose for what's happening now in Cameroon to ensure that at least, those in power could seize the opportunity to start having things in place. Whether they want to turn to the diaspora, we are always willing and we're always looking to engage with those in power to propose, if at least we cannot help to implement, but at least to propose what they can implement to actually get our country on that road of emergency by 2035. It is still a far-fetched dream, but I'm thinking from where I stand, it's a possibility. Not until the government could actually start reaching out to the diaspora, not just to the few, but for those who also want to contribute, but who have just been yearning and waiting for that opportunity. But it's not just the diaspora, but other forces in Cameroon, any progressive forces, some of the opposition parties. I think the opportunity is there for the government to start thinking and engaging all of the positive forces of the country, towards developing our country. So it was a wonderful opportunity for you guys to be here and discussing that very important topic. I look forward in 2 weeks' time for us again to start planning for our third, and that will be our third event coming up in 2 weeks' time. And I'm sure many of those who are watching us tonight would be joining again us in that third program, and many more to come. So this is only the second, and we're looking towards the third edition of our open conversation. Thank you again to you, Jean-Michel and Fulbert, for
Thank you.
debating with me this afternoon. It's been a
Thank you.
wonderful experience. I'm sure you will be with me again very, very, very soon. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you.
So just wanted to say thank you for Vincent and those who've been helping us in the background, just to ensure that this program is live. It's been a wonderful time together, and I look forward for us working again in the future. Thank you, and good evening to you.